I'm Avery Selby, and you're watching Campus Reform. Today I'm joined by North Carolina Congressman Dan Bishop. Full disclosure, Congressman Bishop represents my hometown in the state's 9th Congressional District, and he's been in the news recently thanks to a viral video in which he questions an abortion activist who struggled to define a woman but definitively stated her belief that men can get pregnant and have abortions. Here at the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform, we cover transgender ideology in higher education. From men competing in women's sports divisions to language guides and preferred pronouns. What gets taught in the ivory tower does affect American society. Even Ketanji Brown Jackson, the next Supreme Court justice, could not define a woman during her confirmation hearing. I'm excited to get into this topic. Congressman, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Avery. I'm glad to have the chance to be with you.
On May 18th, you were in attendance at a House Judiciary Committee hearing on abortion rights. You asked several witnesses to define a woman, one even a medical doctor who seemed to struggle to answer the question. Abortion activist Amy Arambide defined woman only by identification and also went on to say that men can become pregnant and have abortions. Let's watch that exchange.
What do you say a woman is?
I believe that everyone can identify for themselves.
Okay. Do you believe then that men can become pregnant and have abortions?
Yes.
This was just a cut, but earlier in the hearing, one witness called defining gender using biology as discriminatory. The Biden administration evidently agrees based on its intention to expand Title IX to include gender identity, according to a Campus Reform report. So my first question is, what point were you trying to make when you asked these questions, and did you expect the answers you got?
I'll take them in reverse order, Avery. I didn't know exactly how it would be answered. And it wasn't original to me. Marsha Blackburn asked that, as you pointed out, to Ketanji Brown Jackson. Matt Walsh has made very good points, I think, about what is the understanding of what a woman is now in the ideology of transgenderism, and what is significant about being a woman to them. So I knew I'd get a strange answer. I didn't know exactly what it would be. The first witness I asked was an abortion doctor. She sort of just was obstinate about answering. But the answer I got from Ms. Arambide was pretty clear. It was bizarre, and I think it makes a serious point, which is there is a radical ideology in there among those three witnesses Democrats saw fit to bring to testify to Congress, and they are so bound by their extreme ideology that they can't converse in normal terms. They can't speak to ordinary facts. They have to run from them or avoid answering them. And I think they've got an answer. They're just either they conceal it or they hide from it because they know it will be unacceptable, or occasionally it creeps out and it just doesn't. To most people, it doesn't make sense. That's why that goes viral. I think it's because most people just roll their eyes or shake their head at the radical nature of the ideology and the degree to which it keeps them from engaging with truth.
So if this is truth that we're talking about here, what is your response to claims that taking biology as fact is discrimination?
I just think that if someone said to me that I think is very true about this episode, it's the postmodernist philosophy, what they call Hegelian dialectics, the critical theory, all the way that it interacts with our culture. And they're supposedly the party of science. You always remember the Democrats call themselves the party of science, but they are at war with the science or the natural understanding of men and women being different and having important differences and being comfortable with those. And I just think that everyone who's listening to people who are talking or advising Congress about implications of the Dobbs decision to come or abortion policy need to understand who they're hearing from. It goes to, as a trial lawyer of many years, I'd say it's an issue that goes to their credibility. And indeed, that's why people, I think, made that something that there were 60 million impressions for the Judiciary Committee Republicans' tweet within about 3 days, because it's something that's fascinating to people.
You also mentioned that this is a radical idea. Is this something that is contained to DC, these urban areas. What are your constituents saying to you about this?
Well, Avery, as you are well aware, all of this began on the campus, and it has moved. It's a form of activism. It has a clear objective. They want to decenter the family. They want to change, radically transform the United States. They see the United States as a system of domination and hierarchies among groups, and they want to fundamentally upend that. It's just alien to the way most people regard the United States or cultures that are based on fundamental freedoms set forth in our Declaration of Independence. It is an opposite form of organizing society, and they think it will be utopia. I think it would be hell on earth.
You did bring up how this started on college campuses. Here at the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform, we're covering this. We are covering how college campuses are imposing preferred pronouns on students. Tampons are being placed in men's restrooms, and students are being marginalized for believing that there are only two sexes. What role do you see the American universities playing in this national debate? Do you think this is something that can be fixed? Can we fix this in the university system?
I think we've got to get a lot tougher. And to your point, or the point we were discussing earlier, it began on campuses. It is now infusing campuses. It's ever ubiquitous on campuses. And there's an authoritarianism to it, but it is spreading into it has spread into other cultural institutions and across our landscape. And I think it frightens a lot of people. I have no doubt that the American people, as represented by the going viral of that interaction that I had, most people by far think this is foreign, think it is dangerous, it is unconstructive. But I think it requires a new political unity, in order to respond. I think frankly, we're going to have to deal with universities and the way they're financed, including the amount of public funding that goes to them without question. I think we're going to have to make sure that we protect the rights of conservative minorities on campuses so that they can speak out against this and have an opportunity to vie for traditional Western civilization. And so I think I fight it. I intend to fight for our fundamental underlying cultural norms and traditions. And I think we have to stop being hesitant about it and understand that we're in an all-out war for our nation and the heritage that I want to give to my children and grandchildren.
Just this week, we were on campus. We went to the University of California, Fullerton, and students explained that their knowledge of pregnant men came from social media, TikTok videos, for example. So what would your message be to young Americans who insist that these things are real, that something like a pregnant man exists because they saw it on a TikTok video?
Yeah. Well, I think the problem, one of the problems that we face is as a cultural matter, we've also become accustomed to or satisfied with achieving what knowledge and information we have based on TikTok videos or other similar social media influences. So your point in asking that question is well taken. You need to spend some time. James Lindsay is a very good source of explaining the origins of critical theory and what it represents, how it flows from a cultural Marxism, from the Hegelian dialectics and the Frankfurt School of Philosophy. And when folks understand, for example, that more, they see what's dangerous about it. And I think as a general proposition, people need to be more educated about Western civilization and what changes it made in history. And then you're better equipped when you see something on TikTok to understand that it's foolishness. So education is the key. It's unfortunate that on many campuses, education is no longer the priority. Indoctrination and orthodoxy are the priorities. It's got to stop. So God bless campus reform efforts and what you're doing.
I do want to pivot now to abortion, which was a topic of inquiry at your May 18th hearing. In another video that we put out this month, Campus Reform covered pro-abortion protests at George Mason University, where phrases like people with uteruses were used in place of women. How does this terminology change or complicate the national debate on abortion?
I think that it signals the weakness of the philosophy underlying radical autonomy generally. That is to say, the people who are for radical autonomy, which is opposed to ordered liberty. Radical autonomy is about you can do whatever you want to. There are no truths, there are no realities, and everything's a matter of social construct. It's very closely tied to what we've been discussing in terms of critical theory and its foundations in cultural Marxism. When people, you can disregard the rights of an infant who's days away from being delivered only when you depart from the ideas of foundational truth and the rights of the individual. That's what these guys do. Well, let me make sure I'm clear about that. The notion of the rights of an individual within society, the fundamental rights that our Constitution recognizes, those things they depart from, and yet they want to embrace radical autonomy that leads to group identities and increasingly complicated intersectionalism. It is a chaotic way of thinking, and there's a consistency, though, between their notions about what constitutes a woman, and that you don't have to be a woman to be pregnant or deliver an abortion, which is contrary to our common sense, and also their radical views on the right to abort a baby. In fact, as some advocates have said, notably on TikTok, they think you should be able to do an abortion after birth. The one activist in particular we've seen on Twitter says as long as a woman wants to do it, she should be able to do it to a 2-year-old or a 10-year-old. It's insanity, and we need to see those together because they go along with one another.
The reason that we're talking about this at all is because on May 2nd, Justice Samuel Alito's draft majority opinion in the Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization Supreme Court case was leaked, and it incited nationwide protests and vandalism, particularly on college campuses, against the potential of overturning Roe v. Wade. What potential is there for debate or reconciliation on this issue, especially when vandalism of pro-life memorials on college campuses is becoming so common?
For our civilization to survive along the lines we were discussing before, we have to have certain consensus ideas. That is to say, left and right have to share them. And we are seeing, as part of this transformative movement on the left to abandon our fundamental ideas, that there is a constant trampling over of institutional norms. You can see it in the idea to get rid of the Senate filibuster that's been in place for the whole history of the nation, to make DC a state, which was contrary to the whole structure of the Constitution and the reason for a capital existing. It goes on and on. We see a lot out of Democrats these days. This leak of the first time in the history of the United States Supreme Court, a leak of a draft opinion in the middle of the deliberative process is another trampling of an institutional norm. And then you see, following quickly on the heels of that, the Democrat House majority in the House Judiciary Committee decides to hold a hearing in the middle of those deliberations over the subject of abortion, trying to intimidate the court. You see the addresses of the personal residences of justices leak, and as far as I know, in an unprecedented fashion, mobs form outside their homes to protest. And whether or not those protests are inside the First Amendment entitlement protection, it is a cultural matter, a matter of our discourse. It's a new thing. And all these things are the trampling of institutional norms in a way that makes it harder for us to function as a democracy. And they talk about wanting to protect our democracy, but they constantly are in an antagonistic position to the basic building blocks of our democracy as it has always existed. It's a very dangerous moment.
This leaked draft, it's not an official decision yet. In the past, you've discussed your pro-life views in some other interviews. If Roe v. Wade is overturned and abortion is shifted back to the states, what do you want to see happen next for the pro-life movement?
I do think it's very important for the decision-making to go on state by state. State legislatures ought to, in my view, return the restrictions on abortion that existed at the time Roe v. Wade was decided by the United States Supreme Court, and overturn the abortion law of almost every state, or at least 34 states, I believe it was at the time. And in history, abortion had always been restricted. Those restrictions ought to return. There's going to be a healthy debate. We're going to see in some parts of the country, undoubtedly, there will be radically permissive abortion posture, the notion that you can kill a child until the moment of delivery and maybe even after. You're going to see that some places. I think that'll have very negative, very deleterious effects in those states. So I think over the next decade or so, this political process will finally be allowed to be worked out among the American people rather than shanghaied or diverted by decision of a brute force decision of the United States Supreme Court in the nature of judicial activism.
And I do have one final question for you. North Carolina is a very purple state. The state voted for Trump most recently, but has a Democrat governor. And the state tends to garner national attention when it comes to elections. What is your take on the upcoming midterm elections now that primaries have ended? And how will the outcome of North Carolina elections impact national politics?
I appreciate your asking, Avery. And I will say there are two things I would focus on. I was an early endorser of United States Representative Ted Budd, now the Republican nominee in North Carolina to be the next United States Senator. He faces Sherry Beasley, a former Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court, who on that court demonstrated exactly the same kind of extraordinary radical posture on significant matters of North Carolina state law, criminal justice in particular. And people are going to get a chance to see how radical that was. I'm confident that North Carolina will reject her and will elect Ted Budd the next senator. The other big development on primary night here last Tuesday was that we have a North Carolina Supreme Court I just mentioned has a 4-3 close partisan majority of Democrats where we elect our court. It has done a number of radical things, including stripping the North Carolina General Assembly of the power to set districts for our legislative and congressional elections. I believe that'll be revisited because I think we have a great nominee, Trey Allen, for that, for one of the two open spots. Well, we have two great nominees, but one had a primary. So I think North Carolina Republicans will retake the North Carolina Supreme Court this year, and we'll see an opportunity to return to constitutional norms and move back away from radical activism on the bench. That's a very important thing to me, and I think to North Carolinians.
Well, that is all I have for you. We appreciate your insight on these issues. I'll be keeping my eye on North Carolina. Congressman, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Avery. It's great to meet you, and it's great to be here today.